In the silence that follows betrayal, there is a sound that few dare to name. It is not the voice of your enemy, nor the echo of an argument long past. It is the fracture within your own chest, the realization that the one you trusted most, the one whose smile promised safety, has turned your openness into a hunting ground. In this space, the empath learns the truth that the tenderness they carried like a gift has become a snare. The hunter has become the prey. Yet even here, Jung whispers across time, the meeting with oneself is at first the meeting with one's own shadow. And perhaps that is what this pain truly is, not the end of love, but the confrontation with the unseen territory within your soul. You have felt the warmth of compassion stretch out from you like sunlight reaching toward others in the hope that it might nourish them. But some do not come seeking warmth. They come seeking fuel. The narcissist is not born whole. Their grandiosity is not strength, but armor forged to conceal a void they cannot bear to face. And so they feed upon those who offer light, binding themselves to your empathy until you begin to confuse their hunger for love with your duty to heal them. This is where the war begins, though it is not fought with weapons. It is fought in the silence between words, in the distortions of memory, in the gaslight that flickers just enough to make you question your own reflection. What you must understand is that the empath is not weak, though they may be made to feel so. The empath's heart is a mirror capable of perceiving what lies beneath the mask of another. But when the mirror is unguarded, when it reflects without discernment, it becomes a portal through which the narcissist may enter. They do not see your compassion as sacred, they see it as access. And yet within you the unconscious begins to stir. A question rises quiet but insistent. Why do you allow the mask of another to matter more than the truth of your own soul? This is the threshold of shadow work. You cannot walk it by clinging to the image of yourself as only kind, only giving, only pure. The shadow is the guardian of your wholeness, and it contains not just your fear of being cruel, but also your unacknowledged power. Jung taught that what you do not make conscious will appear in your life as fate. And so if you deny the part of you capable of saying no, capable of setting boundaries like stone, capable even of rage, then life will summon a figure who embodies that force for you. The narcissist becomes the externalized shadow, the living reminder of what you have exiled within yourself. There is a moment always when the empath begins to notice the pattern. The flattery that once felt like warmth now feels like a net. The apologies ring hollow, rehearsed. The cycles of idealization and devaluation carve into the psyche until doubt becomes a constant undertow. In dreams, perhaps, you begin to see symbols, a predator circling a house with shattered windows, a child crying in the dark. The unconscious does not lie. It offers you images that bypass your rationalizations, pointing you toward what you have refused to see in waking life. Dreams become guides, and if you dare to listen, they whisper, "The danger is not outside you, it is inside the split between who you truly are and who you pretend to be." The persona that mask you wear for the world tells you to be agreeable, to always understand, to forgive endlessly. But beneath it, the self begins to stir like a lion in its sleep. It knows you are more than your role. It knows your essence is not defined by being consumed. And so the tension grows. The empath clings to their image of goodness, while the self demands a fuller truth that you are both light and darkness, both healer and destroyer, both prey and predator. Until you can hold these opposites within life, will keep forcing them upon you from without. And here in the crucible of this struggle, something extraordinary can begin. You realize that suffering is not punishment but initiation. To be betrayed is to be awakened. To be consumed is to be shown where your own boundaries have dissolved. To encounter the narcissist is to confront the mirror of your denied strength. And though it feels like war, the battle is not truly against them. It is against the fragmentation within your own psyche, the split that leaves you vulnerable to those who would feed on your light. Listen carefully now. Every time you silenced your anger to preserve peace, Every time you sacrificed your need to protect someone else's comfort, every time you allowed yourself to be diminished in order to feel loved, you were laying the groundwork for this encounter. And yet within those very wounds lies the possibility of rebirth. For when the empath finally turns inward and sees the shadow not as an enemy, but as an ally, the entire dynamic begins to change. You realize you do not need to be prey. You realize the hunter was never outside you, but within, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be given form. So ask yourself, what part of you has been exiled for the sake of harmony? What power have you disowned, leaving it to emerge only in the masks of others? Can you feel the weight of that hidden self pressing against the door of your consciousness, demanding recognition? Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that is where you now stand, on the threshold of illumination, staring into the abyss, not to fall, but to retrieve what you left behind. Do not rush this. Do not try to escape the pain too quickly, for it is in the descent that the seeds of ascent are planted. What feels like breaking is often the beginning of integration. What feels like weakness is the first stirring of strength, and what feels like betrayal is in truth the invitation to finally meet yourself. There is a silence that comes after awakening, not the silence of defeat, but the silence of reorientation. You begin to notice how the very air feels different when you withdraw your energy from the one who fed upon it. The narcissist's presence once seemed to fill the room, to dictate the rhythm of your heartbeat. But as your gaze shifts inward, the illusion begins to dissolve. Their power was never absolute. It was always tethered to the way you abandoned yourself for them. And now, as you turn back toward your own depths, you begin to see how much of you has been waiting, buried unseen, like treasure hidden beneath centuries of sand. This is the place Jung described as the confrontation with the shadow. The empath who avoids conflict, who forgives too quickly, who carries the burden of other people's pain as though it were their own. This empath must finally meet the forgotten side of themselves. Within that shadow are all the voices that were silenced in childhood, the voice that wanted to say no, the voice that wanted to cry out, the voice that wanted to stop being endlessly responsible for everyone else's emotions. These voices did not disappear. They sank into the unconscious, where they became fuel for projection, drawing in figures like the narcissist, who embody what you will not. Look closely at this pattern. The narcissist does not simply enter your life by accident. They arrive as a living archetype, the embodiment of what you are unwilling to see in yourself. They are the mirror of your unclaimed authority, your unmet anger, your hidden will. In the face of their domination, you are offered a choice to remain fragmented and victimized, or to reassemble yourself piece by piece until the wholeness of who you are can no longer be used against you. It is in this stage that dreams often intensify. Perhaps you dream of being chased, and no matter how fast you run, the predator always closes in. Perhaps you dream of drowning, unable to breathe beneath waves that pull you deeper and deeper. These dreams are not punishments. They are enactments of the struggle within your psyche. The pursuer is your shadow, demanding to be faced. The drowning is your unconscious, reminding you that you cannot live on the surface alone. To integrate the shadow is to stop running, to turn and face what hunts you, and in doing so, to see that it was never the enemy, it was always a part of you longing to return home. The empath learns something profound in this turning, that to set boundaries is not cruelty but clarity, that to speak truth even when it disappoints others is not betrayal but authenticity, that to allow anger its rightful place is not to lose compassion but to expand into wholeness. Jung insisted that wholeness is not perfection, but the ability to hold the opposites of our nature without being torn apart by them. And so you begin to experiment with this truth. You practice saying no without apology. You practice standing still when the narcissist's storm rises, refusing to be swept into their chaos. You practice recognizing that their hunger is not your responsibility and their emptiness is not yours to fill. And yet, the war within is not finished. For every time you assert your truth, the old fear arises. Will I still be loved? Will I be abandoned? Will I become like them if I allow my strength to surface? These questions haunt the threshold of transformation. But if you dare to hold them without rushing for easy answers, you begin to notice something subtle. The very self you feared losing when you stopped overgiving is the self that finally begins to emerge. The archetypes within you stir in response. The persona once rigid and polished begins to crack, revealing the deeper layers beneath. The anima, or animus. The inner counterpart that bridges your conscious mind with the depths of the unconscious, rises in dreams, offering guidance through symbols whispering of qualities you have neglected. Perhaps the inner feminine brings you images of receptivity, reminding you to listen to your intuition. Perhaps the inner masculine calls forth courage, reminding you to speak with authority. These encounters are not fantasies, they are movements of the soul guiding you toward individuation, toward becoming who you truly are, rather than who you thought you had to be. And in this unfolding, the narcissist loses their grip. Not because they change, but because you no longer provide the ground for their performance. Their grandiosity no longer seduces you because you have begun to see the wound beneath it. Their criticism no longer destroys you because you have claimed the parts of yourself they once made you doubt. Their need for control no longer binds you because you have remembered that freedom is not given, it is reclaimed. But perhaps the deepest revelation is this. You realize the narcissist was never just another person. They were also a messenger, an archetypal figure carrying the lesson you most needed to learn. Painful as it was, they forced you to turn toward your shadow, to stop living as half of yourself, and to claim the wholeness you once fled. The hunter becomes the prey, yes. But in that moment the prey discovers they were never powerless. They discover that the predator was also a teacher, and that what seemed like destruction was in truth an initiation into the depths of the self. Stay with this realization. Let it move through you, because in recognizing it, something inside begins to shift. The empath is no longer simply the wounded one endlessly giving until nothing remains. The empath begins to embody strength, discernment, and vision. And in this shift, the war transforms. It is no longer a battle for survival, it becomes a passage into rebirth. And now you feel it, the slow and deliberate unraveling of illusions like old threads slipping free from a tapestry that once defined your entire sense of self. It is disorienting, yes, but it is also liberating, because as each false strand falls away, you begin to see what was always hidden beneath the raw, untamed fabric of your being, untouched by the roles you have been forced to play. This is the moment when the empath begins to awaken not merely from the narcissist's grasp, but from the deeper spell of their own unconscious conditioning. The truth is that the narcissist thrives on projection, but so too does the empath. You projected your goodness, your capacity for healing onto the one who could not carry it. You believed their hunger could be nourished, if only you poured enough of yourself into their void. But beneath that belief was an even deeper projection. You were trying to heal the parts of yourself you had long abandoned. The neglected child within the one who first learned that love required sacrifice was calling out for recognition. And instead of hearing that voice within you, searched for it outside, offering endless care to those who mirrored your own forgotten wounds. This is where Jung's insight cuts deep. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The narcissist's inability to empathize, their constant hunger for validation, their ruthless demand for attention. These are not simply flaws to despise. They are distorted reflections of your own inner landscape, the exiled parts of you that crave to be seen, to be valued, to be allowed their rightful place in your psyche. To recoil from them is to recoil from yourself. To confront them is to begin the long process of integration. The suffering then is not random. It is the psyche's attempt at balance, the unconscious pressing upon you through the theater of relationships. What feels like betrayal is also a revelation that you can no longer survive by living as half a person, that to disown your strength, your voice, your rightful anger is to attract those who will embody it for you mercilessly until you reclaim it. And so the war between the empath and the narcissist becomes a mirror of the war within the war between your persona and your shadow, between who you pretend to be and who you truly are. The empath persona whispers, "Be gentle, be forgiving, never cause harm." But the shadow growls beneath, "I will not be silenced, I will not be devoured, I will not bow." Only when these voices meet, when they are allowed to coexist within you, does the cycle begin to break. Notice how the body responds when you begin to claim this truth. The chest that once tightened with guilt when you said no begins to expand with breath. The stomach that once knotted in fear of rejection begins to settle with calm. The shoulders that once slumped under the weight of responsibility begin to rise unburdened. The psyche does not shift in theory alone, it moves through flesh, through heartbeat, through the rhythm of your breath. Healing is not only seen in thought, it is embodied in presence. You may find yourself walking differently, speaking differently, even dreaming differently. In one dream, the predator may no longer chase you. Instead, you may turn to face it. And in that moment, it changes shape, perhaps into a wounded animal, perhaps into a shadow of yourself. The dream reveals what consciousness is beginning to realize, that the enemy was never absolute, but always a reflection of your own denied energy. And when you retrieve it, the hunter loses its power. But be careful here. Integration is not about becoming hard, nor is it about becoming cruel. It is not about trading empathy for indifference. Integration is about wholeness, about the ability to hold both tenderness and strength without disowning either. To love fiercely while also protecting your boundaries. To care deeply while refusing to be consumed. To forgive when it is right, but also to walk away when it is necessary. This is where the process of individuation takes root. Individuation is not self-improvement, nor is it becoming some perfected image of goodness. It is the gradual unfolding of the self, the totality that includes shadow and light, anima and animus, conscious and unconscious. The empath who integrates becomes neither victim nor oppressor. They become whole, and in that wholeness they are free. And perhaps the most astonishing revelation is this: as you step into wholeness, you no longer attract the same patterns. The narcissist who once seemed magnetic begins to lose their allure. You see through the performance, and instead of being pulled into their orbit, you remain grounded in your own. You begin to call into your life those who meet you not as prey, not as fuel, but as equals. Relationships shift from arenas of survival to places of reciprocity, where giving and receiving flow without manipulation. And yet, individuation is not a destination. It is an ongoing journey, a spiral that deepens with each turn. Every shadow you meet reveals another layer of light. Every descent into suffering contains the seed of another ascent. The war within is not ended in one battle. It is transformed into dialogue, into relationship, into the ongoing work of being fully human. So when you think of the narcissist now, do not see only the wound they inflicted. See also the doorway they opened, however unwillingly, into the depths of your own soul. Without them, you might never have turned toward your shadow. Without them, you might never have remembered that wholeness was waiting for you all along. Let this truth settle within you. You are not prey. You never were. You are the hunter of your own unconscious, the seeker of your own truth, the one who dares to descend so that you may rise. And in that courage you become something the narcissist can never touch, whole, awake, unbroken. There comes a point where the landscape of your inner world no longer resembles the battlefield it once was. The wounds are still there, etched into memory, but they no longer bleed as they did before. Instead, they become scar maps, reminders of where you have walked and what you have survived. And it is here in this terrain of healing that a new question begins to take shape. If you are no longer prey, then who are you? If you are no longer defined by rescuing, soothing, or surviving the narcissist, then what essence waits at the center of your being? This is the essence of rebirth, not a return to who you once were, but the discovery of someone you have never fully allowed yourself to be. Jung called it the emergence of the self, the archetype of wholeness, the axis around which all opposites find their balance. It is not a mask, not a role, not an identity crafted to please others. It is the deep and eternal center, the part of you untouched by manipulation, untouched by betrayal, untouched even by time. To live from this center is to step into freedom, not the shallow freedom of doing as you wish, but the profound freedom of being what you are. And yet the path to this center is not linear. Old voices still echo. The persona still tries to seduce you back into the familiar script. Be agreeable. Be forgiving. Keep the peace at any cost. The shadow still tests its strength, rising in moments of raw anger or fierce refusal. But something has shifted. You are no longer split between them. You can witness both without collapsing into either. You can let the mask fall away without fear of annihilation, and you can let the shadow speak without being overtaken. This is the first taste of integration. Notice how the world around you begins to respond when you carry yourself from this center. Conversations take on a different weight. You no longer bend every word to protect the fragile egos of others. You speak more slowly, more deliberately, not to defend yourself, but because you no longer fear your truth. You begin to notice who listens and who recoils. Some will withdraw because they cannot feed upon you anymore. Others will draw closer, recognizing in you the rare presence of authenticity. The empath who has walked through the fire of narcissistic abuse emerges with a strange kind of power, not loud or domineering but magnetic. It is the power of someone who has faced their own abyss and returned carrying light. People sense it in the steadiness of your gaze, in the calm that surrounds your words, in the refusal to be manipulated. It is not that you have become invulnerable to pain. You still feel deeply, perhaps more deeply than ever. But you no longer confuse feeling with weakness. You no longer confuse compassion with self-sacrifice. You know now that empathy without boundaries is not love, but self-erasure, and you refuse to disappear. Dreams begin to shift, too. The pursuer who once haunted you may now stand before you in stillness, transformed from predator into guide. Perhaps you walk together side by side, no longer enemies, but companions in the journey of integration. This is the psyche's way of signaling that what was once repressed has been welcomed, that the war has begun to dissolve into union. For what the unconscious longs for is not endless conflict, but wholeness. And yet wholeness is not comfort. It is responsibility. To carry your shadow consciously means you can no longer project it onto others. You can no longer blame the narcissist for embodying the power you refuse to claim. You can no longer see yourself only as victim, for now you recognize your complicity in silencing your own voice. This responsibility is not heavy. It is liberating. It means you are no longer trapped in cycles of dependence, no longer bound to patterns of betrayal. You stand as the author of your own life, awake to both the darkness and the light that dwell within you. Here lies one of Jung's most radical truths. Individuation is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming real. To be real is to admit your complexity, to embrace your contradictions, to stop chasing purity, and instead embody wholeness. You are not only the empath, nor only the shadow, nor only the wounded child, nor only the reborn self. You are all of these woven together into a living tapestry. And in that tapestry nothing is wasted, not even your suffering. The narcissist fades at last into perspective. You see them not as an all-powerful figure, but as a soul deeply entangled in their own shadow, a prisoner of their own unacknowledged wounds. You may still feel sorrow for them, but it is not the sorrow that compels you to save them. It is the sorrow that recognizes the tragedy of a life lived behind a mask, cut off from the wholeness they refuse to face. You no longer confuse your compassion for their chains. You understand that their journey is their own and your freedom is to release them. And now you begin to live differently. You notice beauty again in the quiet of a morning sky, in the laughter of a child, in the way your own breath steadies you when the world grows loud. You notice how relationships feel when they are rooted in reciprocity rather than control. You notice how your body no longer contracts in fear, but opens in trust, not because others have changed, but because you have. The war within has given birth to peace, and from that peace arises a new way of being in the world. But do not mistake this peace for passivity. It is not the fragile peace of avoiding conflict. It is the grounded peace of one who has faced their inner storms and no longer fears them. It is the peace of one who can meet the gaze of another without losing themselves. It is the peace of one who knows that love does not require sacrifice of the soul, but the presence of it. Hold this truth close, for it is the fruit of your descent. You are no longer bound to be hunter or prey. You are no longer trapped in the war of masks and shadows. You are whole. And in that wholeness, you become the very thing the narcissist could never destroy: a soul that cannot be consumed, a light that cannot be extinguished, a self that has finally come home. And so the journey carries you deeper into a place where words grow quieter and images take their place. You see yourself standing at the edge of a vast mirror, its surface rippling as though alive. You lean closer, and what stares back is not only your reflection but every face you have worn: child and caretaker, empath and victim, healer and wounded, prey and predator. One by one they appear not to haunt you, but to remind you of what you are made of. This is the moment Jung described as the meeting with the self, the place where all opposites converge, where the fragments of your life cease to be enemies and begin to recognize one another as kin. There is grief here, but it is a holy grief. The grief of realizing how much of yourself you left behind, how many years were spent searching for validation in someone else's eyes, how much of your voice was silenced for the sake of peace. Yet, within that grief, lies an unexpected tenderness. You realize that even your strategies of survival were attempts at love, misguided perhaps, but love nonetheless. And when you see it this way, the war softens. You stop punishing yourself for the years you were prey. You begin to honor the resilience that carried you through, and you bow inward to the soul that never stopped whispering even in the silence of despair. Here in this sacred interior, the archetypes shift once more. The persona, once brittle and rigid, becomes transparent, no longer a prison, but a garment you can wear lightly, knowing it is not who you are. The shadow, once feared and denied, now stands beside you as an ally, its energy available to protect, to create, to anchor. The anima or animus, once fragmented and distant, now steps forward as guide, showing you how to live with balance between inner and outer, between soul and world. And at the center of them all, the self radiates like a still point of light, not demanding attention, but offering presence, vast and unshakable. And you understand now what individuation truly means. It is not about erasing the past, nor about becoming untouchable. It is about becoming whole enough to no longer live at war with yourself. Whole enough to recognize that the narcissist was not your destiny, but your initiation. Whole enough to see that what you mistook for love was in truth a summons calling you into the depths where your soul waited to be found. From this place, relationships themselves take on a new meaning. You no longer search for completion in another because you have found the wellspring within. You no longer fear abandonment because you no longer abandon yourself. You no longer confuse control with intimacy because you know what true intimacy feels like. It is the meeting of two whole beings, neither devouring nor consumed, but standing side by side in freedom. And yet perhaps the most extraordinary shift is this: your compassion expands. Not the naive compassion that left you vulnerable, but a deeper compassion that arises from wholeness. You see the narcissist now not as a monster, but as a fragmented soul terrified of their own shadow. You do not excuse their harm, but you understand its roots. And this understanding does not bind you to them, it frees you from the bitterness that might have corroded your spirit. For you no longer need to carry hatred. You carry clarity instead. The world begins to look different through these eyes. Where once you saw only threat, you now see possibility. Where once you feared your own depths, you now find strength in them. Where once you defined yourself by wounds, you now define yourself by the light that survived them. And though the path of individuation is lifelong, though shadows will rise again in new forms, you know now that you need not fear them. For each descent carries within it the seed of ascent, and every darkness you face is only another doorway into a deeper light. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. That privilege is yours now, not given by the narcissist, not bestowed by the world, but reclaimed from within. You have walked through the archetypal war of prey and hunter, and in doing so you have remembered what the narcissist could never see, that empathy is not weakness, that tenderness is not fragility, that love is not self-erasure. You have remembered that your soul is vast, and that no mask, no shadow, no predator can diminish its radiance. And now, as you stand before that mirror of the self, watching all your faces merge into one, you understand the final truth. You were never simply the empath, never simply the prey. You were always the one who contained them all. You were always the one who could walk into the fire and return carrying light. You were always the one who could descend into shadow and emerge as wholeness. And in that realization, the war ends. Not with surrender, not with victory, but with integration. So let the mirror settle. Let the ripples grow still. Look into your own eyes and see there the reflection of everything you have been, everything you are, and everything you are yet to become. This is the gift of the journey. This is the transformation that no one can take from you. This is the end of the war and the beginning of a life lived from the soul.
Waking up spiritually is not a gentle breeze or a peaceful dawn. It is an earthquake, a silent implosion that begins within and shatters everything you once called truth. You do not glide into awakening. You are ripped from the dream. One day you are floating along with the current of the world, and the next you are gasping for air, standing still as everything around you continues spinning. At first you think something is wrong with you. Why does the world feel so loud, so fake, so disconnected? Why do the things you once loved now feel hollow? Why do the people closest to you feel so far away? That moment is not madness. It is the birth cry of consciousness. Carl Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But becoming who you are means tearing away who you are not. It means letting the false identities, borrowed beliefs, and conditioned roles burn in the fire of truth. And no one prepares you for that fire. No one warns you that awakening real. Awakening is not light and bliss and eternal peace, but rather the most brutal form of honesty you will ever encounter. It is the process of facing every lie you've told yourself, every wound you've hidden behind achievement, every insecurity you buried beneath performance. And that truth, that exposure, is disorienting. It's like walking through a house you've lived in for years and suddenly realizing every room is filled with someone else's furniture, someone else's ideas, someone else's memories. The furniture has to be moved, the walls repainted, and you finally must decide what belongs and what doesn't. That reconstruction is exhausting, because it requires you to meet yourself for the first time and to admit that you never really knew who that was. Not truly. Not fully. And that truth can feel like betrayal. But in that betrayal, there is also liberation. You are not the mask. You never were. And what waits beneath the mask is terrifying only because it is free. And freedom, when you've lived in chains, feels like death before it feels like rebirth. The first dark side of spiritual awakening is confusion, not the fleeting kind of confusion that passes after a good night's sleep, but the bone-deep, soul-rattling disorientation that tears down the scaffolding of everything you thought was real. It's a sacred disorientation, not a mistake or a setback, but an initiation. Your internal compass spins wildly, and the landmarks of your inner and outer world crumble one by one. You wake up and no longer recognize your own thoughts. The values you once held dearly begin to feel foreign. The conversations you used to enjoy feel hollow. The career you poured yourself into feels like a cage. The spiritual beliefs that once inspired you now feel like outdated clothes that no longer fit. This is not regression. It is not a breakdown. It is a stripping away. In Jungian terms, this is the emergence of the self pushing against the brittle walls of the persona you've outgrown. Your psyche, once comfortable within the roles you played, is now in revolt. It demands truth. It demands authenticity. And that demand is brutal. Your dreams become more vivid, charged with symbols you don't yet understand. Synchronicities begin to flood your life, but rather than comfort you, they unsettle you. They remind you that the universe is watching, listening, responding, and you're no longer sure you like that. You feel as though your life is no longer your own, as if you are being moved by some unseen force like a puppet, whose strings are now being pulled by the soul rather than the ego. And the ego resists. It panics. It grasps for certainty, for routine, for anything that can restore the illusion of control. But control is the first casualty of awakening, and in its place you are left with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the deafening kind. The kind of silence that echoes, that forces you to hear your own inner chaos. You might try to numb it out, run it, bury it in distractions, but nothing works for long. Because once the self begins to awaken, there is no going back. It wants you whole, it wants you honest, and it will burn everything in its path until you stop resisting and start listening. You begin to realize that confusion is not a sign of failure, but a necessary purge. Like a fever that burns out the sickness, like a wildfire that clears dead wood from the forest. Confusion is the space where your old identity dies and your true self begins to take root. And in that space, though it feels like you are lost, you are actually being reborn. The second dark side of awakening is disconnection. Not the surface-level loneliness of a missed call or an empty weekend, but a deep, soul-deep severing from everything and everyone you once found familiar. It begins subtly. You find yourself withdrawing from conversations that once felt lively, now feeling like theater. You sit at tables filled with laughter and stories, but something inside you feels miles away, untouched. The topics feel trivial. The opinions feel rehearsed, and the connection that once felt effortless now feels forced. It's not arrogance, it's not bitterness, it's not depression, it's awareness. You're seeing the invisible walls. You're hearing the unspoken fear beneath the words. You're noticing the way people avoid their own silence by filling every moment with noise. You can't unsee it. You can't pretend anymore. And so you begin to retreat, not out of judgment, but out of necessity. Out of self-preservation. Because when your soul begins to speak, the volume of the world becomes unbearable. You crave solitude the way a drowning person craves air. But in that solitude, you feel the ache of absence, the absence of belonging, the absence of understanding, the absence of being truly seen. It's the paradox of awakening. You become more connected to life, yet feel more separate from the world. You see the sacred in everything, yet can't explain it to anyone. You feel love for humanity, but struggle to be around people. This isolation is the crucible. It is the wilderness that strips away your need to belong to a tribe that doesn't understand your language. And it is here, in this sacred solitude, that the seeds of your true tribe begin to sprout. Not quickly, not conveniently, but organically. You begin to attract souls who see with the same eyes, who listen with the same depth, who don't ask you to shrink or translate. And until then, you learn to befriend your own aloneness. You learn to sit with the silence and let it teach you. Because silence, when honored, becomes a sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, you begin to remember disconnection is not exile. It is redirection. It is the path the soul takes when it can no longer breathe in the rooms you once called home. And while the loneliness aches, it also awakens. It makes room for a new kind of connection, one rooted in essence, not roles. One forged in truth, not familiarity. One that doesn't demand explanation, but offers presence. And that kind of connection is worth the wait, because it doesn't just fill the space, it honors it. The third dark side of awakening is pain, not superficial. Pain, not the fleeting sting of rejection or the ache of a broken promise, but the raw, searing existential pain of being flayed open from the inside out. This pain doesn't come from something going wrong. It comes from everything beginning to become right. And that is the paradox. As your soul realigns with truth, all the parts of your life that are not in resonance begin to fracture. The relationships built on pretense begin to collapse. The jobs pursued from insecurity begin to suffocate. The dreams borrowed from others begin to die. And it hurts not because they were ever truly yours, but because you wrapped your identity around them. Losing them feels like losing yourself, but that loss is grace in disguise. Pain is the soul's scalpel. It cuts away what cannot follow you into the next chapter. And though it leaves you bleeding, it also leaves you clean, awake, stripped, alive. You begin to feel things you've spent decades avoiding. The grief you buried beneath busyness, the shame you numbed with validation, the loneliness you masked with ambition, all of it returns, not to punish you, but to finally be seen, to be felt, to be held. Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And now you understand. You understand that awakening isn't about transcending suffering. It's about learning to sit inside it without flinching, to feel it without fleeing, to witness it without identifying with it. You realize that the wound isn't the enemy, it's the doorway, and walking through it requires everything: your patience, your humility, your honesty. Because this pain doesn't just want to be felt, it wants to be alchemized. This is the sacred task of the awakened soul, to transmute suffering into wisdom, to take the broken shards of your former self and sculpt them into something whole, something holy. You begin to see that your tears are not weakness, they are salt water baptisms. You begin to understand that your trembling is not a flaw, it is evidence that your heart is no longer numb, that you are alive to the full spectrum of human experience, and that aliveness, while painful, is sacred. The pain sharpens your perception. You see the world more clearly now, the beauty in a stranger's smile, the tragedy in a crowded street, the longing hidden in every conversation. You feel the collective ache of humanity as if it were your own, because it is. Awakening tears down the illusion of separation. You begin to understand that your pain is not isolated, it is archetypal. It is the pain of generations, the inherited wounds of your lineage, the unspoken trauma of your culture, the forgotten cries of the collective unconscious. And when you feel it, you're not just healing yourself, you're healing the field. This is the burden of the awakened heart, to carry more than just your own sorrow and to still choose love, to still choose to create, to still choose to show up, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Because that is the mark of the awakened one, not the absence of suffering, but the ability to hold it with grace. You begin to offer your pain to something greater. You write, you paint, you sing, you speak. Not to escape the wound, but to express it, to give it form, to honor its message. This is what it means to become a vessel, a bridge, a transmitter. You're no longer just a person navigating life. You're a soul embodying truth. And that embodiment is not easy. It requires a constant shedding, a constant listening, a constant dying to what is false so that what is true can live. And in that process, pain becomes your teacher. It no longer dominates you, it disciplines you, it no longer crushes you, it carves you, and what it carves out of you is not hollow, it is holy. It is a space where compassion can live, where wisdom can root, where love can grow. This is the alchemy of suffering, not to bypass it, but to enter it fully, to let it initiate you, to let it transform you from the inside out. And as you walk through the fire, you stop asking, when will this end, and begin asking, what is this teaching me? That shift is the beginning of your mastery, not mastery over others, but over your own shadow, your own pain, your own becoming. Because you've realized that this path was never meant to be painless, it was meant to be purifying, and in that purification something ancient awakens, something eternal, something unbreakable, the self. And that self, though born through fire, carries the quiet strength of one who has died many times and still chose to love again. The fourth dark side of awakening is the existential unraveling. Not the poetic kind you read in spiritual books, but the kind that rips the floor out from under you and leaves you dangling in a void, where nothing makes sense, not even the desire for meaning itself. One day you wake up and the questions hit you like a tidal wave. Who am I really? Why am I here? What is all this for? These are not idle curiosities. They are cries from the deepest part of your being. Cries that demand answers not from a guru or a book, but from the silent, terrifying space within. You look around at your life and feel like a stranger in your own story. The roles you played, child parent, partner professional, suddenly feel like costumes in a theater production you never auditioned for. You begin to question every decision, every identity, every belief you ever inherited. Not because they were wrong, but because they were unexamined. And awakening demands examination. It demands that you shine a light into every corner of your psyche and ask, is this really me? And most often the answer is no. This is the unraveling, the sacred disintegration. It is the death of the constructed self, and like all deaths, it is messy. It is painful, it is confusing, but it is also necessary, because only in the ashes of who you were can the truth of who you are begin to rise. This stage is where many people turn back. They grasp for old certainties. They try to reattach themselves to identities that no longer fit, but you can't go back. Once you've seen the illusion, you can't unsee it. The unraveling continues whether you resist it or not. And the only way through is to surrender, to let go of the need to know, to let go of the fantasy that you are supposed to have it all figured out. Jung spoke often of the chaos that precedes individuation, the process of becoming whole. He knew that before you can be whole, you must be broken, and in that brokenness, you must find the courage to remain, to sit in the ambiguity, to live the questions without demanding answers. This is not passivity. It is faith. Faith in the deeper intelligence of the soul. Faith in the unfolding of your own becoming. You learn to trust the process, even when it makes no sense. You learn to stay open, even when you want to shut down. You learn to soften, even when everything in you wants to harden. Because you begin to see that the unraveling is not destruction, it is revelation. It is the peeling away of all that is not you. And what remains is not empty. It is sacred space. Space where something new can be born. Something real. Something unshakable. Something that was always there waiting beneath the noise. Your true self. Your eternal self. The self that doesn't need a name or a role or a reason. It simply is. And in that being you begin to find peace, not the peace of having all the answers, but the peace of no longer needing them. The fifth and final dark side of awakening is spiritual arrogance, the most seductive and subtle shadow of all. It creeps in quietly like a whisper, dressed in wisdom. After all the burning, the weeping, the dying, you begin to see. You begin to know. You begin to understand truths that were hidden from you your entire life. And it feels divine, because it is. But here's the danger: the ego doesn't die when you awaken. It evolves, it puts on robes, it speaks in mantras, it learns to quote Rumi and Jung and the Bhagavad Gita. It learns to smile serenely while silently judging those who haven't awakened yet. It stops craving praise but begins to crave recognition as someone who no longer craves anything. And if you're not careful, you'll believe you've transcended ego when in fact you've merely cloaked it in spirituality. This is the final test of awakening humility. Not performative humility, not false modesty, but true bone-deep surrender to the mystery. To the knowing that all knowing is partial, that the deeper you go, the less you know. That awakening is not an arrival, but a spiral staircase without end. You begin to realize that the universe doesn't owe you enlightenment, that your insights, while beautiful, are not better than another person's silence, that your path, while sacred, is not superior. Everyone awakens in their own time, some through suffering, some through grace, some through science, some through devotion, and none of them are wrong. When you truly awaken, you no longer feel the need to awaken others. You embody the light instead of preaching it. You serve instead of saving. You listen more than you speak. Because you've learned, sometimes painfully, that unsolicited wisdom is just another form of control, and control is the antithesis of awakening. So you release the need to be right. You release the desire to be special. You stop trying to be the lighthouse and instead become the quiet shore that holds space for others to find their own way. You stop needing to impress the divine and start living as if the divine is in everything, including the things that irritate you, scare you, or trigger your wounds. Including the people who don't get it yet. Including the parts of yourself that still struggle. This is what true spiritual maturity looks like. Not perfection, not perpetual peace, but radical compassion. Compassion that doesn't try to fix. Compassion that doesn't rush. Compassion that understands everyone is carrying something invisible. Everyone is on a journey you cannot see. And sometimes the ones who seem furthest from awakening are the ones whose souls are doing the deepest work behind the scenes. You begin to hold others with reverence, not because they're right, but because they're human. You begin to hold yourself the same way, and in doing so you dissolve the final illusion that awakening makes you better. It doesn't. It makes you honest. It makes you soft. It makes you see. And when you truly see, you cannot look down on anyone, because you recognize yourself in them. You recognize your former selves, your still struggling selves, and you bow. You bow to the mess. You bow to the mystery. You bow to the miracle that anyone wakes up at all in a world built to keep them asleep. And this is where the journey completes its circle. You return to the world, not above it, not beyond it, but within it. You return with new eyes, but the same beating heart. A heart that has been broken open and filled with something wordless. A presence, a stillness, a love that asks nothing and embraces everything. You no longer need to prove you've awakened. Your life proves it. Your presence proves it. The way you breathe through conflict, the way you speak when no one is listening, the way you sit with those in pain without needing to fix them, the way you laugh, the way you cry, the way you hold space for yourself and others. That is the true fruit of awakening. Not enlightenment, not superiority, but intimacy with reality. An intimacy so deep, so raw, so quiet, that it becomes contagious. And that's the irony. In the end, the awakened do not try to awaken anyone. They simply live in such a way that others cannot help but feel safe enough to awaken in their presence. So if you've made it this far through the confusion, the disconnection, the pain, the unraveling, and the humility, then you are not broken. You are being initiated. And every scar you carry is a sacred reminder that you chose to see when it was easier to remain blind. You chose to feel when it was safer to remain numb. You chose to become when it was simpler to just survive. And that choice, that holy, terrifying, courageous choice, is what makes you not just awakened, but awakening. Still unfolding, still deepening, still discovering, and may it never end. Because the moment you believe you've arrived, you've stopped evolving. Stay soft, stay curious, stay grounded in the mystery, and let your life, not your words, be the quiet revolution that turns suffering into wisdom, separation into unity, and awakening into love.
Have you ever felt the silence after someone's words strike too deeply? Not the silence around you, but the one inside. The stillness that comes not from peace but from a blow so subtle, so psychological, that it leaves no scar on your skin, only on your sense of self. You stand there seemingly unharmed, and yet something in you has shifted. Someone's tone, a glance, a sentence that to others might mean nothing, yet to you it echoes. Why? It's not because you're weak. It's because you're alive. You're emotionally attuned. You're a being of instinct, memory, and longing. You feel the vibrations beneath the words, and those subtle tremors, when they resonate with your own inner fault lines, become quakes. But here's the truth. You may have never been told you were never meant to live at the mercy of others' emotional weather. Not your parents' disapproval, Not your partner's unpredictable moods. Not your boss's cold tone. Not society's endless judgment. What if you could walk through this life without your soul being pierced by every passing arrow? Not because you become hardened, but because you awaken to the inner architecture of your mind, because you understand the laws of your own emotional gravity. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That is the invisible storm, the unseen puppeteer. The reason you flinch, defend, collapse, or explode before your conscious self can even intervene. You've lived most of your life reacting sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in ways that consume days, years, or entire relationships. But reaction is not a flaw, it's simply a system, an old system, a protective system. And now it's time to transcend it, because beyond reaction lies the birth of something rare: emotional sovereignty. It begins the moment you stop assuming that every emotional blow must be countered, justified, or absorbed. It begins when you realize you don't owe your energy to every situation that provokes you. You've probably noticed how easily someone can disturb your inner state. A careless comment, a judgmental stare, a subtle dismissal, and suddenly you're spinning not just emotionally but narratively, rewriting memories, doubting yourself, arguing in your mind with people who aren't even there. That's not overthinking. That's your psyche seeking resolution. But resolution doesn't come from revisiting pain on a loop. It comes from waking up to the choice you forgot you had, to pause, to observe, to not react. You might think, "But I can't help it. It just happens." Of course it does, until it doesn't. Until you begin the sacred practice of response over reaction. Jung understood that your psyche is not simply a battlefield, it is a power grid. Every reaction leaks energy. Every unnecessary defense drains your life force. And your life force is sacred. When you react instantly, you are no longer sovereign. You are possessed by old wounds, by ancestral patterns, by echoes of voices that once shamed you into silence. But you are not here to be ruled by ghosts. You are here to awaken as the master of your own inner space. Next time someone speaks, to provoke, pause. Feel the urge to react rise in your chest, and then don't. Let it burn. Let it pass through like smoke. And ask yourself, does this truly deserve my energy? Or is this a reflection of someone else's storm? Most of the time it's not about you at all. The person trying to hurt you is not revealing anything about your worth, but everything about their own suffering. Their need to provoke is not power, it's pain. A scream for control, a desperate push to release what they cannot hold. But you, if you pause, you become the stillness they cannot shake. This isn't about being cold. It's about being rooted. Think of a deep oak tree standing silent through wind and fire. The tree doesn't react, it simply is. And because it is so fully itself, the storm passes. This is not detachment. This is sovereignty. And if you feel something resisting this, something in you that says, "But I must react, I must explain, defend, assert," look closer. That is your inner child, the one who once had no voice, who once had no power, who once was unseen. Their reaction was survival. Don't shame it. Honor it. But tell that child, you are safe now. We don't need to bleed every time someone points a finger. You are no longer a servant to the moment. You are the chooser, the observer, the one who sees clearly. And the more you choose not to react, the more you begin to see the hidden stories behind every comment, every glare, every emotional jab. Because when you're not consumed by your own reaction, you begin to hear the voice beneath the voice, the trembling beneath the anger. And suddenly you understand people are not trying to hurt you. They're trying to unload what they can't carry. And if you do not offer yourself as their dumping ground, they will move on. Not because you won, but because you did not lose yourself. This is your first awakening, the quiet knowing that no one, no matter how loud or cruel, can touch your peace unless you hand it to them. And today you stop handing it over. There's a moment, just a breath long, when someone throws their emotional storm at you and your instinct begs you to throw it back. That split second is where your old self lives. The self that defends, that argues, that proves, that needs to be seen in order to feel real. But what if you could step outside that moment? What if instead of reacting you watched it unfold like a scene in a film, aware, present, but untouched? This is not emotional numbness. This is not apathy. This is psychological mastery. Carl Jung taught that your psyche is not a single being, it's a community, a constellation of selves. Your ego, your shadow, your dreams, your fears, your inner child, your future self. And they all speak in different voices from different times. When you're provoked, it's rarely your conscious adult self who answers, it's the wounded voice of the past rising up to reclaim something it lost. That's why it hurts so much. Not because the insult is true, but because it hits an old bruise you forgot was there. And the most painful words. They're often the ones that validate your worst inner fears. Not because they're accurate, but because they echo the lies you've secretly believed about yourself for years. You're too much. You're not enough. You're selfish. You're weak. You're fake. They hurt not because they're real, but because somewhere deep down a fragment of you still wonders if they might be. But what if you didn't need to fight those accusations? What if you could walk straight into them, not to agree but to meet them? What if you said, maybe sometimes I am emotional. Maybe sometimes I do fall apart. Maybe I haven't been perfect. And that's okay. Because that is the beginning of invincibility. When you own the parts of yourself you once tried to hide, the world loses its power to use them against you. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of shadow. The shadow is everything you deny in yourself. The anger you suppress, the shame you avoid, the impulses you bury, the weakness you fear. You've spent so long trying to be only what's acceptable, only what's lovable, only what won't be rejected that you've exiled entire pieces of your humanity. But those exiled parts don't disappear. They become your unconscious triggers. They become your projections. They become the invisible strings others pull when they want to shake you. You cannot become emotionally sovereign while pretending to be pure. You cannot become untouchable while terrified of your own darkness. So look inward not to judge but to reclaim. Make a list if you must. All the things you've been called that hurt. All the judgments that made you defensive. And for each one ask, what part of me fears this might be true? What memory is this touching? What unhealed place is crying out? This is not weakness. This is integration. And it's only when you integrate your shadow that you stop projecting it onto others or absorbing theirs. You see, most people are not speaking to you. They're speaking to their reflection in you. When someone tells you you're selfish, what they're really saying is, I'm afraid of asking for what I need. When someone calls you arrogant, what they're really saying is, I feel small in your presence, and I don't know how to hold that. When someone accuses you of being fake, they may be screaming from their own buried longing to be authentic. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But the mirror goes both ways. Everything people accuse you of reveals what they are unable to face within themselves. You are not the cause, you are the screen. And the moment you stop taking projections personally, you step into another kind of power. You begin to feel it in your body, a calm that replaces the old heat, a stillness where chaos once stirred. You feel less need to explain yourself because your truth no longer depends on someone else believing it. This is not pride, this is clarity. You don't owe a response to every provocation. You don't need to convince anyone of who you are. Their misunderstanding of you is not your responsibility to fix. But to hold that truth, to really hold it, you must know who you are beneath the masks. And you have worn so many. The strong one, the kind one, the funny one, the quiet one, the healer, the achiever, the agreeable one, the good one. Each mask once served a purpose. Each was a survival strategy, a way to stay safe, to be loved, to belong. But now they keep you hidden from yourself. The persona is not evil, it's necessary. But it is not the whole of you. Jung understood that the journey of becoming what he called individuation is the journey from persona to self. From performing who you think you should be to living who you truly are. And who are you underneath it all? Not a role, not a reaction, not a collection of expectations. You are the space between stimulus and response, the still point behind the eyes, the awareness that sees without needing to control, the presence that cannot be insulted because it knows I am not this story. I am the one watching the story unfold. And when you rest in that presence, insults become whispers. Manipulation loses its grip. Emotional storms pass without entering. You are not invulnerable because you're armored. You are invulnerable because you are whole. And wholeness does not require defense. You've been told your entire life that to be strong is to be unaffected. That power looks like indifference. That strength is silence in the face of attack. But those are performances, masks of coldness worn by those too afraid to feel. Real strength is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of self even in the fire of emotion. And there will be fire, because the world is not soft. People will still misunderstand you. They will still try to provoke, manipulate, diminish control. The winds of life will not stop blowing simply because you've chosen peace. But peace does not depend on the wind. It depends on your roots. So ask yourself, what have I rooted my identity in? Is it approval? Recognition? Belonging, control? Success? Most people base their identity on how they're seen, on how well they meet the unspoken expectations of others. But when your sense of self is built on external mirrors, every rejection becomes an earthquake. Every cold glance a threat. Every criticism a collapse. You become dependent on others to remind you that you exist. That is not identity. That is bondage. Carl Jung taught that true selfhood emerges not from conformity, but from confrontation. Confrontation with the unconscious, with your shadow, with the unknown forces within that shape your behavior without permission. He called this the process of individuation, and it is not comfortable. It is a descent before it is an ascent. It is the unraveling of who you thought you were so that you can become who you truly are. And this unraveling begins the moment you stop asking, "Do they approve of me?" and start asking, "Do I know myself?" Do you know who you are without your titles, without your roles, without your masks? Do you know what matters to you? Not what should matter, but what truly moves your soul. Do you know the sound of your own inner voice, not the anxious one, not the echo of your parents, not the social voice, but the one that speaks in calm knowing? When you start to hear that voice, you begin to build your unshakable identity. Not one made of stone, but one made of truth. Truth that does not flinch in the face of opinion. Truth that does not change with each room you enter. Truth that is not afraid to stand alone. It's a quiet confidence, not loud, not proud, not performative. It's the kind of confidence that no longer needs to defend itself because it is rooted in something deeper than praise. You begin to see, the more you seek approval, the more you hand over your emotional sovereignty. You become a beggar for validation when you were born a source. You don't need to convince anyone of your worth. That is not your task. Your task is to remember it, to carry it like breath, to embody it so fully that even when the world forgets you do not. Imagine waking up and not needing anyone to like you for you to like yourself. Imagine walking into a room and not scanning it for cues about how to act, but simply being. Imagine receiving praise and staying grounded. Imagine receiving criticism and staying grounded, because neither defines you. They simply pass through you. That is emotional invincibility. Not the denial of feeling, but the unshakable center from which you feel it. It does not mean you don't care. It means your caring is no longer conditional. It means you can love without clinging. You can disagree without disconnection. You can be seen without performing. You can be misunderstood and still remain at peace. And yes, it takes time. It takes practice. It takes patience. But more than that, it takes honesty. You have to be willing to see where you've built yourself on sand. You have to be willing to admit that some of your pain comes from the roles you've played to avoid rejection. You have to be willing to admit that some of your suffering has come from betraying yourself to belong. And then you stop. You stop betraying. You stop performing. You stop asking the world to validate what you already know deep down, that you are enough. Even when you're messy, even when you're flawed, even when no one is clapping. Jung said, individuation is the process of becoming your true self. Not the self they raised you to be. Not the self society rewards. Not even the self you thought you had to become in order to be safe. Your true self. The self that was buried under shoulds and shame. The self that was silenced by survival. And when you begin to live from that place, when your words and actions begin to match the quiet voice inside you, will feel something shift. You will feel whole. Not perfect, whole. And whole people are not easily manipulated because they cannot be split. They do not abandon themselves just to be liked. They do not suppress truth just to keep peace. They do not chase love that costs them their own soul. You've seen what happens when you trade your authenticity for belonging. You've felt the quiet grief that comes from being liked for a version of you that isn't real. No more. Your peace no longer depends on how you are received. Your peace comes from within, from knowing who you are and living it. That is what it means to be emotionally untouchable. You don't control how others see you. You don't control what they say. You only control whether you hand them your inner world. And from this day forward, you don't. There's a deeper layer now. Beneath the calm, beneath the presence, beneath the unshakable posture of self-awareness, there is a door most never open. Never. It is the door to everything you've hidden from yourself. And if you truly want to walk through life unbothered, untouchable, whole, you must open it. Carl Jung called it the shadow, not because it is evil, but because it is unseen. It lives in the places you've refused to look. The parts you deny, suppress, or silently wish did not exist within you. The envy you don't want to admit. The rage you've swallowed for years. The shame that still curls your spine when no one's watching. The need to be loved that makes you betray yourself. The desire for power, for control, for escape. These aren't mistakes. They are your humanity. And the shadow is not your enemy. It's your teacher. You cannot become unshakable by pretending to be all light. You become unshakable by meeting your darkness and no longer being afraid of it. Because what others use to hurt you only works if you still believe it's a wound. When someone calls you fake and a part of you fears you are, then the insult lands. When someone calls you selfish and you've been taught to hate your own needs, then it hurts. When someone says you're weak and you've rejected the part of you that feels, then you collapse. But if you've already made peace with these parts, if you've already said to your own heart, yes, sometimes I feel small, sometimes I hide, sometimes I ache to be chosen, then there's nothing left for them to expose, no shame for them to manipulate, no guilt for them to use, no fear for them to inflame. This is what it means to integrate the shadow. You bring your hidden self into the light, not to be punished, but to be held, because the parts of you that react are the parts still waiting to be loved by you. And here's the truth that most never understand: the people who hurt you most are not showing you their power. They're revealing the exact places where they've abandoned their own shadow. The man who calls you emotional has spent his life choking down his own feelings. The woman who says you're arrogant still carries the weight of feeling invisible. The person who mocks your boundaries has never had the courage to set their own. They do not see you. They see the parts of themselves they cannot face. And so they lash out not to destroy you, but to distance themselves from their own pain. But when you've done the work of integrating your shadow, you no longer absorb their projection. You recognize it. You name it. You let it pass. You can even eventually have compassion for it, because you know what it's like to live in hiding. You know what it's like to reject yourself. You know what it's like to confuse power with control. But now you choose something else. You choose wholeness. Not the perfection of light, but the integration of all. This is not a spiritual trick. It's not a mental hack. It's not a performance of being unbothered. It's deep inner congruence. A quiet, steady presence that no longer flinches when the world tries to expose you, because you've already stood naked in front of your own soul and whispered, I see you, and I still choose you. The truth is, most emotional pain isn't caused by what others say. It's caused by what their words awaken in us. If you want to become unshakable, you must stop waiting for the world to speak gently. Instead, begin listening to what your pain is telling you about what you have not yet accepted within yourself. This is the sacred reversal. Where once you feared your sensitivity, now you see it as depth. Where once you hated your anger, now you honor it as a signal. Where once you rejected your need for love, now you cradle it like a child. You become your own inner sanctuary. And here's what happens next. The people who once knew how to trigger you lose interest. Not because you've shut down, but because there is nothing left to control. You no longer respond in the ways they expect. You no longer provide the reaction they crave. You are not cold, but you are sovereign. And to someone still trapped in their own shadow, that sovereignty is baffling. But to those who have also done the work, it is magnetic. You begin to draw in people who meet you from their wholeness. Conversations deepen. Connections clarify. Chaos fades. Not because life becomes easy, but because your inner world no longer mirrors the instability of others. You no longer fear judgment because you have faced your own. You no longer fear rejection because you have accepted yourself. You no longer seek to be understood by everyone because you have made peace with being misunderstood. This is your power, not in dominance, not in defense, but in the quiet, immovable presence of someone who knows I contain multitudes. I hold both light and dark. I no longer fight myself. I no longer run from truth. And when you stop running from yourself, no one else can chase you down. There's a silence that lives beyond acceptance. A stillness that arises when you no longer fear what people say, or what they think, or what they project. When their emotional chaos swirls around you and cannot find a place to land, because the place it once struck inside you no longer exists. That silence is sovereignty. Carl Jung never used that word explicitly, but he pointed to it with every teaching on the self. The self, not the ego, not the persona, not the roles you play. The self is your center, the axis around which your psyche orbits. It is what remains when every illusion has fallen away. And emotional sovereignty is the lived expression of that self. It means no longer being ruled by the moods of others. It means feeling deeply without drowning. It means staying rooted even when others are falling apart. Not out of arrogance, not out of detachment, but because you've reclaimed the one thing the world taught you to outsource your emotional authority. You've spent most of your life absorbing emotions that were never yours. You've walked into rooms and carried tensions that didn't belong to you. You've wept for people who never cried for themselves. You've burned yourself to keep the emotional temperature comfortable for everyone else. And now you are done. Emotional sovereignty means you begin to ask in every moment of emotional overwhelm, "Is this mine?" You feel the anxiety rising, and instead of spiraling, you pause. You ask, "Is this mine?" You feel the anger bubbling, and instead of unleashing it, you breathe. You ask, "What part of me is being touched? Is this reaction true or inherited?" You feel sadness creeping in, and instead of collapsing, you become curious. You ask, "Is this grief from the present, or am I still carrying a sorrow that began in childhood?" This is the difference between being unconscious and conscious, between being a sponge and being a vessel. You stop absorbing. You stop reacting. You start choosing. Because even when the emotion feels real, especially, then you must question its origin. Not to deny it, but to place it in the right hands. Some emotions are yours to feel. Others are invitations to let go. Jung said, "The meeting with oneself is at the same time the meeting with others." When you meet yourself fully, you begin to meet others clearly. You see through the noise, through the projection, through the manipulation. Not because you are jaded, but because you are awake. And when you're awake, you don't chase what isn't yours. You don't accept guilt that doesn't belong to you. You don't hold shame that was passed down. You don't confuse other people's fears with your own. You don't take on sadness just because someone else refuses to process theirs. You no longer carry the emotional weight of everyone you love because you finally realize they are not helpless, and you are not responsible for their wholeness. That is what sovereignty gives you: freedom from emotional codependency, freedom from the trap of tying your peace to how others feel. You stop thinking, "If they're mad, I must fix it. If they're hurt, I must apologize. If they're distant, I must chase." No. You breathe, you stay, you feel, and you wait to discern what is truly mine to carry, and what isn't. You bless and release. Sovereignty doesn't mean you never cry. It means your tears come from truth, not from self-abandonment. Sovereignty doesn't mean you're never triggered. It means you use the trigger as a signal to look inward, not lash outward. Sovereignty doesn't mean people can't reach you. It means they must meet you in your clarity, not your confusion. And once you start living this way, something remarkable happens. People treat you differently, not because they've changed, but because you have stopped allowing access to your inner world without conscious consent. Your boundaries become sacred, not walls, but doors. Doors that you open intentionally, not reflexively. You no longer let people enter through guilt, or pity, or pressure, or shame. Only truth, only respect, only resonance. And those who once manipulated you with emotional tactics, whether overt or subtle, find that those tactics no longer work, because you no longer fear their disapproval, because you no longer confuse their pain with your obligation, because you no longer betray yourself just to be loved. That is the highest form of inner peace. It's not found in isolation. It's not found in numbing. It's not found in pretending you don't care. It's found in the deep recognition that you are not here to be an emotional container for everyone else's unprocessed chaos. You are here to hold yourself fully, and in doing so you become the kind of presence that changes every room you walk into. You don't just survive emotional storms, you regulate the weather. You've come a long way though, perhaps it hasn't felt like movement. Because this journey isn't measured in miles. It's measured in the moments you chose to feel instead of flee, the times you stood still instead of reacted, the places where you turned inward not to hide, but to remember. And now standing here, something inside you has changed. It's subtle. There's no applause, no fireworks, but the silence within you has deepened, and that silence is sacred. It means you no longer need the world to validate your peace, because you've remembered what was always true. The source of that peace was never outside of you. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." You have done that. You've looked into your shadow not to destroy it, but to retrieve the parts of you you once feared were unlovable. You've untied the knots of projection one by one and discovered that most of what others say about you has nothing to do with you at all. You've stopped reacting to emotional attacks, not because you're passive, but because you've found something stronger than defense discernment. You've stepped out of the false self, the one shaped by approval, shaped by fear, and stepped into your unshakable center. And from here, life looks different. You begin to see with new eyes. When someone raises their voice, you don't tremble, you listen, you feel, you check within. Is this mine? No. Then I let it pass. When someone disrespects your boundaries, you no longer debate whether you deserve to hold them. You just hold them, without apology, without anger, with clarity. When someone accuses you of being too much or not enough or wrong in ways that once would have broken you, you breathe. You remember, I am no longer available for emotional manipulation. I no longer offer my soul as a canvas for other people's unresolved pain. And this doesn't make you distant. It makes you real. Because when your identity is no longer shaped by fear, your love becomes purer. You love not from need, not from performance, not from the hunger to be chosen, but from presence. You love because it is natural to you, not because you fear being alone. You love without clinging. You love without pleasing. You love without shrinking yourself. This is what Jung pointed to in the process of individuation, not just discovering who you are, but becoming it, embodying it, living it. You are no longer a mirror. You are no longer a sponge. You are no longer a reflection of everyone else's expectations. You are your own ground, your own flame, your own truth. And now from this place you move through the world differently, not untouched by pain, but no longer ruled by it. Not blind to the wounds of others, but no longer wounded by their projections. Not devoid of emotion, but awake in it. Even when life throws its sharpest edges, you no longer fracture. You bend, you breathe, you integrate. Because every wound now has meaning. Every trigger is a teacher. Every emotional charge is a chance to return to yourself. This is the rhythm of the sovereign soul. Triggered pause, breathe, observe, integrate, transform. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to never react again. But now you know the way back. The way back to stillness, to center, to sovereignty. You can walk into a room full of judgment and still feel safe inside your skin. You can be criticized by someone you love and still know your worth. You can be misunderstood and feel no need to correct the narrative. Because your peace no longer depends on being seen accurately. Your peace comes from seeing yourself clearly. So speak this with me now from that deep place within. I am the sole guardian of my emotional world. No one enters without my consent. I feel deeply, but I choose what I carry. I accept all that I am: light, shadow, soul, and self. And in that acceptance, I am unshakable. Let these words echo through your being, not as affirmations, but as awakenings. You don't need the world to change. You don't need people to behave differently. You don't need the perfect childhood or the perfect partner or the perfect peace. You need only this to remember that your soul was never meant to be reactive. It was meant to be radiant, anchored, free. And now you are. Your work now is not to convince anyone of your growth. It's to live it. Walk differently. Speak slower. Listen deeper. Love cleaner. Let your emotional sovereignty be the quiet revolution that changes not only your life, but the lives of those who meet you in your new vibration. Because people will feel it. They will sense your calm. They will touch your stillness and wonder why their chaos doesn't move you. They will try their old tactics, manipulation, guilt, drama, and find they no longer reach you. You will no longer be pulled into storms that are not yours to weather. And those who are ready for your energy will rise to meet you. This is not the end of your journey. It's the beginning of a new one where nothing and no one controls your inner experience again. You have become emotionally invincible, not through force, not through armor, but through integration. You are no longer at war with yourself, and so the world no longer has power over you. Walk forward now, not as a reaction, not as a mask, but as yourself, fully, finally, forever.